Welcome into WarUp on the WPIAL. Greg Warnock, Jeff Upson with you here. Jeff, we are now officially into the individual postseason. Things kick off here this weekend. But before we get into that, first let's talk a little bit about this past weekend and the team championships. Obviously, when we last had our show, we were set to go for the quarterfinals, but it had to be a lot different feel this time not being at the Giant Center.
Yeah, it was a lot different. It was weird. It was different. It certainly, after being there for 20 plus years, and for it to be at Altoona. I will say though, Friday night it was loud for the AA session, especially. It was pretty loud, but it was a little tight. It was a little crowded. I thought everything went pretty smooth though. Everything was even with the weather, they changed the schedule and everything moved up on Saturday. I thought it was good. So from a logistics standpoint, it was fine. Everything went well, but from a make it a big deal in a certain environment, it didn't feel like that, right? It certainly wasn't anywhere close to what the Giant Center was able to provide in terms of feel, but it is what it is. We'll see what happens after this 2-year cycle, see if anything changes, and we'll try to make it a little bit better.
As far as the WPIL goes, on the AA side, Burrell obviously had one of the best in the nation in Faith Christian in the quarterfinals, and obviously lost that match, and not to anyone's surprise. But they did fall down in the consolations and did drop a decision as well to Erie Cathedral Prep, who ended up finishing in 4th place. So all told, Burrell goes 2-0, but does get some experience against some obviously talented wrestlers here in AA. I guess, obviously, Jeff, the big thing first and foremost, Faith Christian, Bishop McCourt, that had everybody talking, right? How was that matchup? I guess if you're looking for excitement, that was probably the one match that got everybody the most amped up.
Yeah, I mean, it was all everyone was talking about, right? I hate to say it, but AAA was kind of like an afterthought, and that's nothing to take away from Becca or Nazareth, or Connellsville or anybody else for that reason. But at the same time, it was a AA show, right? Faith Christian versus Bishop McCourt was number 1 versus number 2 in the nation, which again hasn't happened before in the PIAA. It was really cool to see. The matchups were, the coin flip was everything. Paul Myers and I were on the call for the finals on the broadcast, audio only, but it was that flip was so important, and with Faith winning that, they were able to dictate a lot of some of the matchups that they wanted to, including 127, where they sent out Jax Forrest, and then they bumped away from him. So it was certainly the talk, and especially because of the prep or the private Catholic schools, right? When you look at the top, I would almost call it top 5 schools, with Berks Catholic being almost like your 5th best team in AA, all being Catholic private schools. It certainly had a lot of chirping. There was a lot of chatter there, and I heard a lot of it, but it's nothing like you don't get on the forums. I mean, my gosh, you can't go on social media without it being a topic of conversation. Every time I post updated team rankings, there's at least 30 comments on the private Catholic situation that we're in Pennsylvania. And it's not a wrestling problem. It's across all sports, for the most part, all sports, but especially the big ones: football, basketball, wrestling. I certainly don't follow like girls softball or soccer, so I can't tell you if Catholic schools are winning those too, but this is certainly not a new problem, and it's not a wrestling specific problem, but it is what it is, right? I tend to not dwell on it too much, but certainly it was a conversation and a topic this weekend.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not going to change. It's, as much as you need to, want to write your lawmakers and whatever else. I mean, I think it's just something that's been happening for years, and it's not something that's going to be pressing that a lawmaker feels they need to step in and fix this.
Right. I mean, and there has been push on the legislative side to get some momentum rolling. And I think with the way and the PIAA responded by having the if you get a certain amount of transfers, you have to bump up, right? I would almost like to see it happen where it's almost like relegation, like in soccer in England, where they have like, okay, your top schools, if you're a top school in double A, like for a certain cycle, you got to bump up to triple A, or vice versa. Like if you are at the bottom in triple A, you can bump down, or almost something like that. We could go off on a huge tangent on my thoughts on the current situation and the landscape and maybe some things to do, but I can tell you one thing: it's not going to change, because it would have to change across all sports. You can't, if you're going to do it for wrestling, you have to do it for all sports. And it's just not really feasible. The only way I could see them doing something is if they separate the different classes and have like a double A, triple A, and then a Catholic private for teams at least. And even that's a stretch, I think. So yeah, it's not going to change. And 5 years from now, we're still going to have the same conversations. It may be even worse. I don't know. But the sun's going to rise tomorrow, and people are still going to hate private Catholic schools and what they view as non-boundaries and ability to pull from all across the state or nation. So nothing's going to change.
Yeah, unfortunately. And you mentioned even just for team, I mean, individual, you're going to have the same argument, right? When Faith Christian and Bishop McCourt win just about every state title in double A, the chirping is going to start right back again.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I think it's especially worse right now, the rhetoric and the conversations, is because it's in double A, right? If it's in triple A, I think it's less of a conversation. And the reason I say that is because double A, I mean, you are wrestling against schools that are tiny, like Fraser, Port Allegheny, Couter Sport, like these schools
Avella.
or Avella, repping Avella, I like it. You're talking about the smallest of small schools. We're talking about remote rural schools. And you're like, how the hell am I going to be able to compete against this program, this team, right? In AAA, it's a little bit different, right? Let's not forget Bethlehem Catholic is up in AAA. They're a double A size school. And, you don't really hear as much about it like you did during those, years where they were just running through the double A state tournament with the Cruz brothers and all those folks, right? So I think it's especially worse because it's in double A, right? If Bishop McCourt and Bishop McDevitt and Faith Christian were all in AAA, the field would be maybe a little bit more level, at least on the state double A side. I don't know. So that's something to look at. But if you're following the rules and you're not getting transfers in after their freshman year, if guys or girls are moving in prior to ninth grade, there's when is the line, right? I mean, if I move into a school district when my child is 6, right, is that a move-in? Like I moved from Pittsburgh to Westmoreland County when my son was 2. I have no idea if my son's ever going to wrestle. Quite frankly, I kind of hope he doesn't. But if he does, it's like, well, you moved into a different school district. Well, yeah, I did. Mainly for education, not for wrestling, right? So when is that? Like, is it 8th grade? Is it 5th grade? I don't know when that date is, but certainly people are upset when kids move in to one specific program, even if it's before 9th grade. Like, and then there's those schools where you don't have to live in those districts, right? And that's another issue. And again, you already got me off on a tangent, Greg. So can we talk about the wrestling?
Yeah, let's switch over to AAA on that side, where the WPIAL did much better, and frankly, we're close to being opponents against one another in a final. Instead, they were in that consolation semi, as we predicted, Jeff. But we can dive through each individual match, but just to kind of go through some of the scores that popped out, right? Nazareth did defeat Franklin Regional, but they gave them all they could handle in a 32-29 win. Connellsville got to the semi with a 38-26 win over Counts Rock South, but did drop a tight one against Bethlehem Catholic, 29-23. Bethlehem Catholic obviously won at Nazareth in second, but Connellsville Franklin Regional rematch, consolation semi, goes a different way this time around. Connellsville beating Franklin Regional 28-22, and Connellsville would go on to be third place team 37-21 over Boyertown. We could dive into all those matches, Jeff, but just wanted to present the landscape, I guess, as far as how it went down.
Yeah, I mean, so let's talk about the quarterfinals first. Nazareth and Franklin Regional was a absolute barn burner, and we expected that. I think when we were previewing it, and even the next night when I was previewing it with Paul and Tyler, the more I was looking at this matches, I was like, man, like it's going to come down to a few matches, right? And 27 was one of those. I said if Nazareth wins 27, they're in the driver's seat. They did win 27. Cooper Weinrich was able to beat Mike Ruan in a 6-3 match. To me, that was huge. I almost thought that 114 Franklin Regional could have got more than just a major. I liked the fact that Luke Ankeny from Franklin Regional got a decision over Tunison at 152. I thought that was a pretty big match. But outside of that, like everything else went kind of as expected. It was actually 32-30, but Franklin Regional lost a team point at 160. So it was pretty damn close, right? And we expected that, right? We expected that. I just thought Nazareth had a little bit more firepower, right? When you look at the bonus points that they were able to garner with Parkins, with Campbell and Simak and Zurcher, that was huge, right? But I'll tell you what, Franklin Regional battled. Guys like Henry Patz able to get a tech fall. Doherty at 285 was able to get a fall. That was huge at 285. I had that as a decision for Franklin Regional. I didn't think that they were going to get bonus points there, so that was huge. But at the end of the day, it was a really good match. There was a lot of good parity in AAA.
Yeah, and you look in that semifinal match, Bethlehem Catholic in Connellsville was another really good duel.
Yeah, I mean it certainly was, and a lot of people looked at that and said, "Man, that was a lot tighter than we expected." Look, Connellsville matched up really well with Bethlehem Catholic. I said that before, is like they match up really well with them, and Bethlehem Catholic they weren't at full strength, so to speak. They were missing a couple guys, and but yeah, it was a really good match. There was some barn burner matches. 121 Reef Dillard and Nolan Rice was a really good match. Vielma and Campbell was a good match. Scanlon and Petrovich, little controversy there. Not sure if it was a takedown, but Petrovich bumps up to 60. Lonzi moves up to 72. And to be honest with you, they kind of had to do that. But I think I would have liked to see them stay down, like put Ruggieri down at 45, but with Frenzy down to 45, it kind of screwed things up a little bit with them. So ultimately they end up getting 6 out of 60 and 72, where normally, I mean, when's the last time that Connellsville lost Petrovich and Vielma, right? I don't think it's ever happened, at least not this year, right? That they lose back-to-back matches there. So when your two big guns lose, like, but again, imagine that flips, right? You flip a couple of those around, and we're talking about a very different result, right? Tyler Gallus rose from the ashes and is able to get a fall at 285. That was huge, right? That was huge for him and for the team. So that kind of made up for a couple points. And Becca did lose a team point at 133 as well. So it was 30-23 without that team point. So yeah, it was a really good match. There was a lot of really good individual bouts within it. And I think we're going to see a lot of them in Hershey in a couple weeks.
And you look at, I mean, Petrovich Scanlon alone, you flip that result, it's 26-26.
Right.
But then you go look at Tommy Gretz gives up a major, 8-0 score. If he doesn't give up the major, there's a bonus point you save. Jake Lilly wasn't in the lineup. Luke Lilly was able to wrestle, but Jake was not. So, I mean, you take a Lilly out of the lineup too. That hurts him a little bit. So minor things. I mean, you're not talking like, oh, this, that, and the other, and six different things have to fall. I mean, you're talking about one result that on a questionable
Yeah,
takedown from
yeah, yeah,
Chandler,
yeah.
you have a tie match. So that's how close Connellsville was to potentially being in the final. And obviously, there's no true second, right? But would love to have seen Connellsville take on Nazareth to see, how they would have shaped up with them.
Especially considering how good Connellsville looked in that Conci semis. And it's really tough because Connellsville loses a heartbreaker in the semifinals, and then you turn around right away. I mean, they're still wrestling on that mat, and you turn around and there's like a 5-minute break, and you're right back into the Conci semis. So there wasn't a lot of rest time, and there wasn't a lot of time to kind of regroup and figure out like how are we going to reverse this loss to Franklin Regional from a week ago, right? They turned it around, man. I'll tell you what, Connellsville versus Franklin Regional. Basically, I think they flipped 3 weights. They flipped 7, 14. What else did they flip? They flipped 45, and then Franklin Regional was able to flip 285. So Tommy Gretz loses to Bufenic the first time around. This time he's able to get a 2-1 win. Franks loses to Coliangelo the last time. Franks is able to get a win this time. Julian Ruggieri gets pinned last time against Max Firestein. This time he defeats him, right? So, I mean, everything was going their way. Now, Doherty was able to get a win over Tyler Gallus, who beat him the last time. So, to me, it was they were ready to go despite the circumstances, and they beat a really good Franklin Regional team. So that was the team we were expecting in the WPIAL finals at Peters Township. That's not the team that showed up, but they certainly came in and finished strong, coming back for third.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And obviously had a great performance against Boyertown. And obviously the tough part too is just the way the bracket fell. It's a shame that you couldn't see Connellsville Franklin Regional wrestling for third and fourth. So
Right.
both teams come home with a medal.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think Boyertown, like I like Boyertown, but Connellsville and Franklin Regional were the third and fourth best teams here. Yeah. And I agree with you. I would have loved to see Connellsville versus Nazareth, but that's you take it away and you say, well, okay, Connellsville, had you won the WPIAL, you would have been in that quarterfinal against Nazareth. And
yeah,
you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's just the facts, right? Coulda, woulda, shoulda. Like if you win the WPIAL, you are now in that same position that Franklin Regional was. You have a chance to wrestle Nazareth for a chance to go to the finals, right? So if you finish second in the WPIAL, that's kind of the pill you have to swallow. But yeah, I would have liked to see that. I also would have liked to see a couple of District 11 teams outside of those Nazareth and Bethlehem Catholic there. Like to see Notre Dame, Green Pond, Northampton, Easton. I mean, they would have done just fine at the state tournament as well.
Yeah, would have made things a lot more competitive, right, as far as some of those duels. And you would have seen more of those 32-29 Nazareth over Franklin Regional 29-20. Like we'd have a few of those that we'd be talking about here tonight instead of, just those couple that really stuck out in the bracket. But, it is what it is. And, obviously congratulations to Connellsville for bringing home a third place medal and, great season from the WPIAL champs, Franklin Regional and Burrell, for a job well done all season long. And look forward to seeing them all in individuals with Jeff. Not only does AA start, but AAA does as well here this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit different cadence or kind of path to Hershey this year, but you got to get used to it and adjust to it, and AAA starts right away.
So let's first start with AA, who obviously always wrestles sections here this weekend. And you look at, so it's broken down. We had 6 sections for team, but for the individuals, they combined 2 of the sections together. So there's 3 sections coming out of the individual tournament. So let's start in AA, where the top seeds in the eastern side, it's Javion Chambers at 107. For the northern side, it's Angela Bonai from Central Valley. And on the southern side, it's Darius Simmons of Burgestown.
Yeah, and Simmons is down to 107. He had been at 114, so him coming down as a senior, I think, is a big move, and I'm excited to see where he is at here. And Chambers is obviously the favorite, I would say, not just in the sections, but in the WPIAL overall. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he does. But the sections, like there's certainly some weights that are a little bit deeper. The Southern section with Simmons, Hanning, those are kind of your top two. And I like those two. But you look at the Northern, Bonai, Braun, even Piero from North Catholic. I think he's pretty tough. So there's some parity there, but there's not a lot of. We kind of know what to expect.
Yeah, absolutely. And 8 wrestlers total in the 107 bracket. On the eastern side, the northern side, they have 10. And in the southern side of 107, there are 8. Going down to 114 pounds in the northern or eastern, rather. At 114, Preston Bubash of Elizabeth Forward is your top seed. 11 total wrestlers in that weight class. At 114 pounds in the north, Bruce Anderchak of Quaker Valley, your top seed. 9 wrestlers total there. And at 114 in the southern, you have Alex Medlin, Best Center, your top seed, with 7 wrestlers in that section.
Yeah, and so when you look at the seeds, Bubash at the Eastern, he's clearly one of the top wrestlers in the WPIAL, being a freshman, 19-2. But Poland's not that far behind either. He's a pretty solid freshman. I think these two are pretty much the top tier guys in that weight class. But then you look at the North, you got a couple seniors, right? You've got Derek Allen, who's a senior from Elwood City, and Camden Bruce from Freedom, who's a senior, and then a junior, Bruce Anderchak. So a little bit more top heavy here. And I like Victor Wagner from North Catholic as well. All those guys have over 25 wins on the year. So I think clearly the northern section is the top section at 114 pounds. Medlin is a junior. He's solid. Clay Neely has 40 matches on the year, 30-10. They've wrestled a lot of really tough matches and tournaments this year, so I think they're battle tested. But I think if you look at it, Anderchak, Bubash, Derek Allen are kind of those guys that people are going to be looking at to make some noise. And unfortunately, we're going to be talking a lot about these same matchups in a week when we talk about the WPIAL tournament. I know you're a big fan of the sections. I know you love the sections, but there's a lot of redundancy here, and not a lot of big competition in some of these. Some of them there are, but for the most part, it's kind of know what you're getting.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing you're looking at, and I mentioned the amount of wrestlers too, because you just see how many kids are actually going to be eliminated.
Well, yeah, how many qualified to the WPIAL?
I believe it's 6, correct?
Correct. So
yeah. I mean, a lot of these weight classes we'll see how they got as we go deeper in, but yeah, there's some weight classes like we've already talked about, 7 kids in one or 8 kids in one. So really, you show up and make weight, you got a pretty good shot of making it to next week. So
yeah, I wish it was like that when I wrestled.
Yeah, yeah, 100% agree. The 121-pound weight class in the East, Carter Thomas of Burrell is your top seed. 11 total wrestlers in that weight class. In the North, Austin Kasanovic of Avonworth, your top seed, and there's 9 wrestlers there. And Tucker Main of McGuffey, your top seed in the South, with 11 wrestlers in that weight class.
Yeah, and you look at our Southwest regional rankings. 21 is definitely one of the more heavier in the WPIAL. Carter Thomas from Burrell is pretty solid, but you also have Dylan Bateman from Derry, who's got some really good wins under his belt for the year. I think those two are pretty much head and shoulders above the rest. And then same with when you look at the northern section, Kasanovic is kind of clearly the guy here. Shearing, I don't know how much other guys are going to be able to compete with Kasanovic because he's so much. I'd say he's very clearly out in front of the others. But again, there's going to be some weights like that. Excuse me, 121 in the West, the South. Tucker Main, Noah Collins, Noah Patton. Those are all pretty solid. I like those guys. Patton's just a freshman, but kind of a resurgence with the Washington Prexy. So, and Noah Collins has had a good year as well.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun to see how that shakes out. 127 in the East, Giovanni Beatrice of Derry. He is your top seed, and a total of 7 guys in this weight class. At 127 in the North, Antonio Bonai of Central Valley, your top seed, and 10 wrestlers in that weight class. And at 127 in the South, it is Danny Smith of Burgestown as your top seed, 7 wrestlers there as well.
So the biggest news here is no Cam Baker. That was certainly a surprise. I'm not going to speculate to why he's not able to go, but he's not in at 127. Luca Rosa is for Burrell. So Cam Baker, being a two-time state medalist already, going for his third, ranked highly in the state. He just beat Eric Carlisle, so he was on path and on projected. He did just wrestle Joey Bachman from Faith Christian at the state duels. So not sure exactly what happened there, but it certainly opens up the weight a little bit. Giovanni Beatrice is a senior, a guy who's been I feel like he's been around for a long time, but hasn't quite broken through yet. Guzek from South Park. South Park's had a lot of good. I was very impressed with South Park all season, watching them compete. I think some of their guys have outkicked their coverage, and they've wrestled a lot better than expected. But you look at the Northern, Bonai is clearly the favorite here. There's not a whole lot there that people are going to challenge him on. And then same with the Southern section. I think Danny Smith, Lane Ely are your two top guys, but there's just some weights that, especially losing Cam Baker, it thins out.
Yeah, it's always tough when you see somebody like that, because especially more in Double A, right? Because you get up to Hershey, and it's like, okay, you're just rooting for all the WPIAL guys at that point. As the further they go on, and you just want to see as many get an opportunity to wrestle up there as possible. And when you lose one of those guys, that's, I don't want to say a sure thing, but pretty close to it, right? Not be able to go, and you're just losing one more potential wrestler that you would have saw in Hershey.
Yeah.
So definitely hope nothing but the best for Cam, and he's dealing with whatever he is to not be able to wrestle. And I was looking forward to seeing him and Bonai next week in the WPIAL final, but obviously not going to happen. The 133-pound weight class on the eastern side, Anthony Mucci of Derry, he is your top seed, as they have a total of 10 wrestlers in that weight class. 133 in the north, Garen McDonald of Central Valley is your top seed. They have 11 wrestlers in that weight. And 133 in the south, pretty strong, Jeff. Starts with Drake McClure of Bentworth. Only 6 wrestlers here, so all you got to do is make weight, you're going to go. But it is a deep weight class, I will say that, as far as talent.
I mean, it's a damn good weight class. I'll start there in the southern section. I mean, you got Drake McClure, Emmett Wolf, Mason Wright, Carter Cadis from Burgestown, who's a freshman, Gerardo from Hopewell, who's a freshman. I mean, those right there, obviously you have levels and tiers to this, but Drake McClure is he's one of the best in the state. Emmett Wolf is not far behind, and Mason Wright's right there as well. So all these guys, those top 4 guys, all have 30 or more wins on the season, right? Compare that to the northern section. I'm never going to get these right. The northern section, where they only have one guy with 20 or more wins, and that's Garen McDonald. So the northern section is not deep whatsoever. The south is stacked, and then I would say the east is pretty good too, with Mucci and Stewart. 2 guys, Derry and Burrell, who have seen each other before. I like Joseph Betts from Valley too. He's one of our top incoming freshmen. And again, another South Park wrestler, Travis Kirk, looking to make some noise there. So again, there's definitely tiers depending on what section you're in.
139 pounds in the east, Julian Bertucci of Burrell, your top seed. A lot of wrestlers in this weight, Jeff. 12 total. Probably the most we've seen thus far in the weights we're breaking down. The northern side, Matt Dana of Quaker Valley, your top seed. They also have 12 wrestlers entered. And in the south, Lucas Barr of McGuffey, your top seed. 9 wrestlers going in that section.
Is it starting to look a little bit more respectable to you? You're seeing it like
It
where
is
you don't have to
now. I
just
mean,
make weight. You don't have to make weight, and you advance on and you get a trophy.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
yeah.
Especially those 12 for sure.
You got
Uh,
you got a 50% chance there, right? Yeah, I
right.
mean, so 139 in the East is definitely a little bit more loaded than the others. You got Bertucci obviously at the top, and Burford. Those guys are pretty tough, and then Clem as well. Down a couple ways, you have Jose Martinez from Valley, who's not bad as well. So I think that's definitely clearly the best section when it comes to the 139 pound weight class. Dana, obviously, we know how good he is. 40-4 on the year. Emilio from North Catholic is not bad as well. I believe he is a relation to the Emilio from Seneca Valley. I could be wrong, but I believe he is. And then in the southern section, Lucas Barr is clearly the favorite here. Johnny Gilbert looking to kind of make a statement, but Barr is the clear favorite.
Yeah, what I like about 139, those top guys in the section it's going to make for a fun WPIAL, that weight class at 39 with those section champs plus their own Burford. Should be a lot of fun. 145 in the East, Lucas Boyer of Elizabeth Forward, your top seed, 12 wrestlers in that weight class. At 145 in the North, Owen Lehue of Knock, your top seed, 12 wrestlers there as well. And in the South, Kayla Patton of Washington, your top seed, 8 wrestlers in that weight.
Yeah, and Patton recently dropped from 52 to 45. Again, I think Washington has done a great job of continuing their tradition and keeping the program alive and getting guys that are competitive, right? Kayla Patton is definitely leading that charge for Washington. 33-7 on the year. 52. I'm not saying 52 is harder, but 45 is pretty stacked, right, in the region, let alone the WPIAL. I like Ryder Go as well from Southside. Victor Bonus isn't bad. He's wrestled a lot of a tough schedule there. McGuffey did. Lehue from Knock is right there as well. But the Western region, like outside of Boyer, Workovich as well. He's there, but I think Boyer is the clear favorite.
152, Mason Horwat of Derry, your top seed in the East. They have 11 wrestlers going in that section. Like Gavin McCrae of Freedom in the North is your top with 11 wrestlers there. And in the South, Jonah Early of Fraser is your top seed. They have 9 wrestlers going.
Yeah, I mean, you start seeing some of these weights really fill out, right? We'll start in the South. Jonah Early, 32-1 on the season. We know how good he is. He's been pretty good for Fraser for a while. But you have some other really good, solid competitors in the weight class that I think can push the pace, not with Eardley, but just in general. Logan Noyes, Newman, and Robertson from Fort Cherry. All those guys they have been in the regional rankings this past year. So I think that's a very competitive weight in the southern section. If you look at the northern section, I think McCrae and Dimert are 2 guys that you probably could see them wrestle in a couple weeks in a row. But you throw in Braxton Carr too. I thought Braxton Carr has had a really good season this year. He has a win over Garrett Newman. He's kind of come on to his own. He's 23-8 on the season. So I think he's one to watch as well. And then in the eastern section, you have, again, 2 guys that are familiar with each other. It's Mason Horwat and Zanella, but I like Alex Wiley as well. So I think 52 is a really good weight class for the WPIAL overall.
160 in the East, Ewan Olson of Derry is your top seed, and they have 11 wrestlers there. In the North, Gabe Lilly of Elwood City, your top seed. Not going to surprise anybody this time, Jeff. He has 12 wrestlers in his section weight class. And in the South, Owen Ivchik of Bentworth, he is your top seed. And there are 12 wrestlers in that weight class as well.
Yeah, 160 is a damn good weight class in the WPIAL. The northern section, outside of Lilly, there's not much there. Gabe is clearly favorited from that section. I don't see anyone from the northern section outside of him making noise at the WPIAL tournament. But I mean, you go ahead and look at the southern section. I mean, that's a really good section with Owen Ipchick and Ryan Selesky. We obviously know how good those two are. Alec Palco from Jefferson Morgan, he's a freshman, has only had 17 matches on the year. He was one of our top incoming freshmen this season, and he just hasn't gotten into a groove yet. I don't know if he was injured or if it was a weight issue, but he just hasn't gotten consistent mat time this year. So it's really hard to gauge and judge where he's at, but I know how good he was as a youth wrestler, so I'm expecting him to make some noise if he's healthy and ready to go. And looking at the East, I like the East as well. This is a really good section. It's definitely the deepest section at 160 with Olson leading the way, but Veasley as well from Highlands. Cheney Lewis Jr., a ninth grader who is also on our top incoming freshman. He's a guy who has wrestled in a lot of big-time events throughout youth. Ben Catul from Burrell, another guy who has been battle-tested. Prajana from Mount Pleasant as well. So this is a really good weight class in the Eastern section, and I'm excited to see what the pecking order is coming out of there.
Yeah, and it'll be huge, right? Because at the end of the day, when you have Ivshik, Stalashi, and then obviously Gabe Lilly as well. I mean, you have some studs that are going to go into that mix. So
for sure,
how they finish is going to make it interesting how they seed 160 in the WPIAL. The Eastern side at 172, Isaac Lasinski of Burrell is your top seed. 13 wrestlers entered into that weight class. 172 in the North, it's Marcus Ritchie of Quaker Valley. He's your top seed. They have 11 wrestlers at that weight. And in the South, it's Jackson Angelo of Fraser. He's your top seed, and there are 11 wrestlers in that weight.
I'd say there's a little bit more parity and it's more evenly distributed. Talent-wise across the sections here at 172, Lasinski, we know how good he is from Burrell. Took a loss to Nick Singer at the state duels, but that was kind of expected. Landon Delara from Southmoreland's in the mix. Ethan Miller from Greensburg Salem as well in the mix. So I think you've got a clear top guy, but then some guys that are going to compete as well. Same with the Northern with Marcus Ritchie, him and Jermel Lindsay. Jack Miles is kind of in the mix too as well, but really it's Ritchie and then Lindsay as your top two. Angelo, the southern section is definitely the deepest, I would say, at 172 with Angelo Lehue and Teagarden. Those guys are all going to compete, but Angelo's the clear favorite, being a returning state medalist, down a weight from last year too.
189 pounds in the East, Brady Brown of Derry. He is your top seed. And there are 13 wrestlers here as well. Northern, Zayshawn Williams of Freedom, your top seed, and there are 11 wrestlers in that weight. And at 189 in the South, Malachi Peak of Best Center is your top seed, 10 wrestlers in that weight.
I personally, I love weight at 189. It's a fun weight. Now, you'll notice that Braden Welsh from Fort Cherry is not in at 89 because he's going to be up at 215. He moved up for the postseason there. I'll start in the Eastern with Brady Brown. We know how good he is. But I'll tell you what, Wyatt Markovich from South Park has had a damn good season. Not to be outdone, Jake Mundruff from Ligonier Valley has also had a really, really good sophomore campaign. So Brown is definitely the favorite, being a guy who was a state qualifier last year, blood round guy. But Markovich and Mundorf, I think those two are guys that on paper, they may not have the accolades, headed to Hershey or anything like that, but I think they are definitely in the mix. So I'm excited to see how that shakes out there in the Eastern section. I like the northern section with Zayshawn Williams and Dominic Willis. I think those two are pretty evenly matched. But Malachi Peak from Best Center has been, I hate to be, cheesy, but he's been peaking, man. He's peaking at the right time. He literally was beaten twice or three times by Dominic Willis from Laurel this year, at least twice this year. He comes back and Tech falls him like a week ago. So he is on the right trajectory. I really like him. I think he's the clear favorite here at 189 in the southern section. I'm excited to see him. I'm excited to see, outside of Brown, I'm excited to see that next tier of guys. what that order is going to be like in the WPIAL, because honestly, I think it could be Peak. I could get Markovich, Williams. There's going to be a lot of good competition there, and then you throw in a Slayton Williams and Braden Taggart from Bentworth. Those are two guys that I think are going to compete as well.
215, Luke Boylan of Burrow, your top seed in the East. There's 8 wrestlers entered there. In the North, Colton Carlson of Laurel is your top seed, and 12 wrestlers entered there. And in the South, you mentioned Braden Welsh of Fort Cherry. He is your top seed. 8 wrestlers entered there. And Jeff, just to kind of start here with Braden Welsh, makes a decision to bump up. What comes into that decision?
I think you're just looking at the depth overall. Not saying he's a 2-time state medalist, so he's been on the podium in Hershey. His aspirations are state title. I'm sure a lot went into that decision, whether it's weight or whether it's just, hey, I think I have a better chance of getting top 3 in the state here. Obviously, you have 2 of the best in the nation at 89, 215. Either of Adam Waters or Austin Johnson. Like you really can't have 2 worst guys to be in the same weight with you, right? So I'm sure a lot of it had to do with maybe just looking at the rest of the state, looking at winning a regional title as well, and setting yourself up for Hershey. But regardless, I think he's going to do just fine at 215 despite giving up a little bit of weight. Luke Boylan, the top seed there, Caden Shannon from Southmoreland, those 2 split. Boylan lost to him at the counties, and then he beat him a little bit after that, but I think those 2 are clearly the top guys there. You look at the northern one, I think the northern section for 215 is way ahead of the rest of the section series, because you have Colin Carlson from Laurel, who's wrestling really well. Bressinger, who's a freshman from Quaker Valley, again, has had a really good year. Suter from Carlington, Foster from Knock, Justin Beck from Avonworth. All those guys, 20-plus wins on the season. All 4 are very competitive. And then, of course, when you look at the South with Braden Welsh there, there's not anyone else that I think is going to be get outside the first period with him, to be honest with you. He's just that much better than the rest of the field here.
Yeah, and really, you talk about, state-wise, and it's obviously what they'd have to be looking at, right? Considering he has a couple of state medals, but you look at WPIAL-wise as well. Brady Brown would have been a tough customer, obviously, in the finals. 215 may not be as much competition, right, to win a WPIAL title. So, there's another path as well. I'm sure that went into that decision. 285 pounds in the East, Parker Cunningham of South Park. He is your top seed, 9 wrestlers there. In the North, Henry Barbish of Carlington is the top seed, 10 wrestlers there. And in the South, Colin White of West Green, he is your top seed, 9 wrestlers entered there.
Yeah, you look at the East, Parker Cunningham from South Park, again, has had a really good season. I've got to see him at the county tournament. He looked really good there. And it's a decent weight. You got Peters from Greensburg-Salem, Sager from Southmoreland, and Kuhn from Burrell. May not have, over 20 wins, but they certainly are guys that are going to compete. And at heavyweight, that goes a long way. The northern section, I think, is definitely, you have the 2 of the best guys here with Barbish from Carlington and Casey Wilson from Laurel. Casey Wilson is a guy who I'm pretty high on. I think he's been wrestling well for a long time, so I expect him to continue that. And I think the guy who's standing in his way is Colin White, guy who from West Green who moved up a weight class this year to heavyweight. I like him, and I think him and I think he's going to compete here with Rasuclio from Bentworth. I'm not saying that that's going to be a close match, but I'm saying he's not going to just walk through the weight class. So, yeah, overall, a lot of weights that you're like, these are pretty deep, and the other ones you're like, not a whole lot of depth there. Some you just have to show up to make it to the next tournament. So it is what it is, right? It's kind of like what we talked about the teams. It's the world we live in. It's the way it is, and they're going to go out and wrestle, and we're going to see a lot of these matches again in the WPIAL tournament.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think there's enough there that you're going to eliminate to make it worthwhile. So definitely think it's definitely needed based on the numbers now between AA and AAA. But yeah, should be a good weekend just to kind of get more placement and see where they're going to fall in the brackets for the WPIAL. going over to the AAA side, Jeff, and boy, the East is going to be a bloodbath. Uh,
It
you
always
got the top
is.
14, but you got the top four teams in the
I
WPIAL
know.
in the Eastern section: Thomas Jefferson, Connellsville, Franklin Regional, and Norwin. And then you throw in, teams like Latrobe, Bell Vernon.
West
I
Mifflin has a
mean,
couple of good guys. Yeah. Ringgold.
yeah, you're throwing. I mean, it is going. The East is going to be the if you're looking for a section to go see, come this weekend. I think the AAA Eastern section takes the cake. Just look at 107. Zach Rehack, Thomas Jefferson, your top seed. Tommy Gretz is two. Bofenic, Franklin Regional 3. You got Kai Maxwell of Latrobe at
Mm-hmm.
4. I mean, this weight class alone, there's 10 wrestlers here in this weight, but good luck getting in that top 6.
It's not like double A where you show up and you make weight and you're in. Yeah. The Eastern section, I mean, and we'll just say it right now, it's the clear there is a disparity where the Eastern section is clearly better than the other two sections. I mean, that's a scientific fact. It's just the way it is. But the good thing is you do get the 6, right? You're going to be able to, I think, there's not many weights where you're like, okay, you're going to get screwed. Like there's some guys that are going to miss out, but overall it's going to be nuts. And 107 is a perfect example of that, because you have Rehack, who beat Bo Fennick at the team tournament at Peters Township, pinned him in the first period. Fennick then beats Gretz. Gretz beats Fennick. I want to see these three wrestle, and I want to see, and if I had to guess, I think Gretz is going to come out on top, but I think Fennick and Rehack is going to be another good match, and I don't think Fennick's going to get pinned in the first period this time, but it's certainly anything's possible. Kai Maxwell as well. He's in there. He's had a good season. He's ranked in the state. Luke Patera from Norwin, another guy who I think is going to battle. So, and then you have Gavin Morris from Albert Gallatin, all the way there at the bottom, the 9 seed. He's 9-1 on the season. Hasn't had a lot of mat time, but was one of our top incoming freshmen. A little bit undersized as a freshman for AG, but he's gonna be in the mix as well.
Looking at the other two sections in the north, Anthony Jones of Shaler, he is your top seed. 13 wrestlers entered into that one. And in the south, Nick McGarity of Peters Township, he is your top seed with 7 wrestlers there.
Yeah, so we'll start in the north. Anthony Jones, Bennett Ferraro, Nick Savannah, and Joey Sinan. I mean, it's a stacked weight class. Throw in Riley Smith as well, another undersized 107-pounder. But Jones and Ferraro, that's worth the price of admission. Nick Savannah he's been wrestling well as of late. So and Joey Sinan has battled as well. I think it's Jones, Ferraro, Savannah for sure as your top 3 here. But that goes a long way. Ferraro's get better. They're like a fine wine. They get better as time goes, right? They in the season and in their careers. I think Bennett is wrestling well. I wouldn't be surprised to see him come out on top here. But the news for 107 out of the South was Nick McGarity dropping down to 107. He had been 114 all year. He has not wrestled at 107. He is a returning state medalist, so he's going to move up to number 2 in the state just based off the fact that he dropped down from 114 to 107. And he's going to have a good weight class here. You look at this bracket. We talked about the East, but this is not a bad bracket in the South, because you have McGarity and Michael Johnson and Jackson Hoy. Then you throw in Bryce Thomas as well. Those are 4 really good guys right out of the bat. Cooper Noor from Chartiers Valley is not bad either. So I think you're going to see a lot of competition with all 3 of these weights in all 3 sections.
114 pounds in the East, Dylan Barrett of Penn Trafford. He is your top seed. 10 wrestlers entered here, and when you have a guy like Titus Colangelo as the 5th seed, that's going to tell you how deep the East is at 114. On the in the North, Charlie LaQuatra of North Allegheny, he is your top seed, and there are 14 wrestlers entered there. And in the South, Lucas Carson of West Allegheny, he is your top seed. 11 wrestlers entered there.
All right, so you know how I said some guys are going to get screwed a little bit. Like 114 in the East, there's going to be guys here that don't make it out that deserve to be there. Leaf Circo from Ringgold is a very solid freshman, as is Robert Cordova. Both those guys, 19-9 for Cordova, 23-2 for Circo. And then you look at the six above them. So the big news here is Nico Capusta's back. He has not wrestled prior to last week. He had wrestled 6 matches this season. He had been out with an injury. Got it. It was right before the surge because he was slated to come to the surge and got hurt before that. So it was definitely like October. First time back. He's a returning state qualifier. That to me is just makes 114 all the more better. Barrett, we know how good he is. Colton Klippa, we know how good he is as a freshman. Has a win over Franks. Franks and Colangelo have gone back and forth, as we just mentioned. But look how deep this is. Then you throw in Brody Bronson as well. All these guys, the top 6 guys here, are all in the top 30 in the state in one section, right? So that just shows you the depth here. And again, there are going to be some guys. I would say there's at least 2 guys here that are not going to make it out that deserve to be at the WPIAL tournament. So, but that's the East, right? That's kind of what we expected. You look at the northern section. La Quatra is definitely the guy here, but Brady Rohaley, Gavin Murphy, I think, has been wrestling well this season. And then, of course, in the southern section, you have a couple freshmen, actually 4 freshmen, all seated in the top 4. Carson Jennings leading the charge there. But it's the disparity is real, right? Because in the southern section, outside of those top 2, I don't know who else should be making it, right? As opposed to the East, where I think at least 8 guys could make it. So just the way the the alignments are, it's deep.
Yeah, it really is, and that's what makes that section the place to be if you're picking one to go come Saturday. The East at 121, Leo Joseph of Latrobe is your top seed. 12 wrestlers entered into that one. In the North, Michael Warson of Fox Chapel, he is your top seed. 12 wrestlers entered there as well. And in the South, Thomas Bencho of West Allegheny, he is your top seed. 12 wrestlers entered there too.
So 121 in the East, a lot of depth there. Joseph is a returning state medalist. Nolan Rice, state qualifier. Luke DeSantis is a very solid wrestler for Penn Trafford. LaShawn Haley, I was very impressed with him, freshman from West Mifflin. Another freshman from Norwin, Nathan Gullabon, who's coming in for Landon Sidden. So imagine if Landon Sidden was there too. You'd have him. Carciola from Hempfield is solid. And Nassif from Franklin Regional, another guy who I think has been wrestling well. Dom Costa down from TJ. So it's a good weight class. Joseph is the guy, but Rice is, I think, in a battle there. The northern section, maybe not as much depth, but you certainly have some parity. Michael Warson has been wrestling well. Had a good win last week. Evan Schomburg from North Allegheny, I think, has been wrestling well, and Milligan from North Hills. But outside of those 3, I don't see a whole lot of guys that are going to push. And then you had mentioned a couple freshmen here in the southern section. Thomas Banco from West Allegheny is one of the top freshmen in the WPIAL. Again, kind of like what we talked about with some other freshmen, he just hasn't had as much mat time. He's only had 18 matches, 16-2. Spent some time up at 27. He's down at 21. Him, Pearson Reinhardt, who I've been impressed with all season. John O'Gardner from Cannon Mac, who's also a guy who I think has been wrestling well. Jonathan Emma, who has a couple big wins outside of the district. Landon Alt. Brock Dennison, all the way down at number 6, right? And he's 25-7, a guy who's a regional qualifier. So this is definitely the weight, I would say. Even though the East has a lot of top-end talent, I think this southern section is really going to be the competitive one.
127, Evan Tolliver of Ringgold. He is your top seed with 14 wrestlers entered there. In the North, Santino Sloboda of Butler. He is your top seed. Carter Putt of Indiana is here at 127. Obviously, we didn't know if it'd be him or Nico Fanella. And it is 12 wrestlers in that weight. And in the South, Dom Canale of Trinity. He is your top seed with 13 wrestlers entered there.
Yeah, so crazy situation that happened here at 127 is Santino Sloboda. had wrestled at 21. He wrestled at the Midwinter Mayhem at 121, won that weight class. He broke his descent, so he was going to go up to 127, and then Landon Sidden got hurt, and he couldn't go back down. The descent had already broke, so he was stuck. He was locked in at 127, which, it is what it is, right? He's already committed to college. He's a 2-time state medalist. Like, I'm sure he's looking to win a state title, but he can win a state title. He's going to have to go through one of the best in the nation at either weight, whether that's Sidden, yes, who he beat last year at WPIALs, or like a guy like Keanu Dillard at 27, and he doesn't have to cut weight. So I probably, for 4 weeks in a row, the postseason, I'm sure he's going to be a little bit happier. That is a good weight class when you look at the Northern at 127 with Sloboda, Putt, Funk, John DeLuca as well. I think those top 4 are pretty solid. In the Southern section, I think it definitely has some parity with Dom Canale. Evan Sala has been wrestling really well, a guy who's been limited this year. He's only 14-1. Colton Fisher, another guy from Bethel who has been like a journeyman. He's been wrestling a lot. Floyd Huff hasn't had a ton of matches as well, but I think he's going to compete. And you look at the East, right? Clearly, you have some depth, but it's not as deep as some of the other weights. Evan Tolliver is a regional place winner from last year. Mikey Ruan from Franklin Regional, another guy who I think's had a good season, but there's not maybe as much depth as we looked at in previous weights. A guy I would keep an eye on, Brooks Blasco. If he's healthy, I would definitely keep an eye on him. He's the 8th seed, 14-6. If he's not as healthy as he was last year, I just don't know. We don't know what version we're going to get of him. But, 127 is going to be a good weight, and excited to see how it all shakes out.
133 in the East, Luke Willishell of Latrobe. He is your top seed. 15 wrestlers entered into that weight class. In the North, Nico Fanella of Indiana. He is your top seed. 13 wrestlers entered there. And in the South, Collier Hartman of Cannon McMillan. He is your top seed with 12 wrestlers entered there.
Yeah, I mean, and in the WPIAL at 133, we clearly have we have 2 guys that are really, really good, and we have like a Collier Hartman type as well. So Luke Willishell and Nico Fanella, we could see them wrestle in a next week in regions and the state tournament a couple times here. Both are guys that are going to Division I. Nico Fanella going to Brown, Willishell going to Wyoming, where his brother Gabe's at. So, but 133 in the northern section is pretty good with Fanella and Stedford. But then you throw in Jackson Pollock as well, Jonah Cable. I like him, so I think that's a good weight class. In the eastern section, outside of Willishell, you have Chase Smith, who's been wrestling well, came back late from an injury, but was an integral part to the Franklin Regional lineup. So I think he's going to be in the mix. Jake Lilly, we had mentioned Luke Lilly's not able to go in the postseason, so Jake Lilly is going to go. But outside of those 3, I think it's clearly Willishell, and then I think clearly Smith, and then clearly Lilly. So I think those 3 are pretty solid. And in the West, you have a lot of parity. You have Collier Hartman, who we know how good he is, but then you have Kel Yannick, Seth Miller, AJ Snatchko, Logan Conley, Peter Leventis from South Fayette, and Jake Wright from Trinity. I'd say all 7 of those guys, 6 outside of Hartman, are all competitive. That's going to be a really good weight class. So I think the southern section takes the cake here.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see how Kale Yannick will do against a guy like Collier Hartman should he get to that final, because he's been wrestling really, really well so far this season. In the East at 139, Kai Vioma of Connellsville. He is your top seed, 14 wrestlers in that weight. Dom Ferraro of Pine Richland, your top seed in the North, and 15 wrestlers entered there. And in the South, TJ Allison of Trinity, he is your top seed, 13 wrestlers entered in that weight.
Yeah, so TJ Allison drops from 45 to 39, and I think that's big. For him, I don't know how much he has to cut, but he's going to be a big 39-pounder. State qualifier last year. He's looking to get punch through and get on the medal stand in Hershey, but 39 is a deep weight class all across the WPIAL. You have Allison, Mazanko, and Slovic, and Stout, Chacon from Montour, all in the top 5 here in the southern section. I like that weight class. You look at the northern section, same thing. You have Dom Ferraro, who he's undefeated, has had a hell of a season thus far, and I think it's going to continue on. The question for me is how far can Dom Ferraro go? I could see him going pretty far in Hershey. Ferraro, you have Kerr, you have Zach Hill, Adam Haynes, Alec Fermani as well. I think that's a good weight class in the northern. And then in the southern, the eastern section, Kai Vielma is clearly the guy. But Soto, I mean, I haven't seen much of him. I haven't seen him in person. I've seen him on video a couple times, and the kid can wrestle. I say what you will about New England wrestling. He's good. He's good. So I'm curious to see how he does here at the section tournament. Vielma is clearly one of the best in the state, but you have Owen Campbell, Sarnick, Klingensmith, Pawlowski. I think that's a really good weight class. And Soto's the one I'm going to be watching to see kind of where he finishes out.
145 in the East, Julian Ruggieri of Connellsville. He is your top seed. 14 wrestlers entered into the section tournament there. In the North, Case Chop of Butler. He is your top seed. 15 wrestlers entered there. And in the South, Ramil Islamov of Baldwin. He is your top seed. 14 wrestlers entered there.
A great weight class across the WPIAL. It's probably one of the deeper weight classes. Islamov is a guy who was fourth in the state last year, had a breakout junior year. He's going to West Virginia this year. He's undefeated, but he's going to have his hands full. Ethan Higgins is a guy who's been very consistent for Bethel Park, probably one of their most consistent wrestlers. You have a freshman, Mason Calgaro, who I feel like has gotten better over the season. Elijah Thomas, Shepis and McGarity from Peters Township, even Junko from Trinity, who's moved up from 39 when Allison went down. So I think that's a really good weight class. Islamov is the clear favorite, but I think the other guys are going to compete. You look at the Northern, Case Chop is again the guy who I think is the clear favorite, but you have Fermani and Hine as well that are going to be in the mix. And in the East, Ruggieri got that top seed over Firestein because they've split matches, but he won the most recent. Cindy Han is somebody who's been wrestling well. Got to see him a couple times this year, and he's impressed me with just his grit. But I think the top two here are pretty set.
152, if you're looking for a premier matchup, you're going to see it in the East. Maddox Shaw of Thomas Jefferson, your top seed. Evan Petrovich of Connellsville, your number 2. And they have 14 wrestlers in the East. At 152 in the North, Griffin Reed of North Allegheny. He is your top seed, 15 wrestlers there. And in the South, Darius McMillan of Peters Township gets the top spot, 14 wrestlers enter there.
Yeah, it's not very often you get to see the number 1 versus number 2 in the state in a sectional tournament, right? So when we talk about seeing each other for a couple weeks, there's a legit chance that we see Maddox Shaw and Evan Petrovich wrestle 4 times in a row. That's sections, WPIALs, regions, and states. Like that's a real possibility. Now, I'm sure some other guys are going to try to, not make that happen, but there's a good chance. Maddox Shaw, one of the best in the nation. Petrovich headed to Pittsburgh. Obviously, Shaw is a returning state champion. But that's a good weight class. You have Cole Doppelhauer as well, Luke Anke from Franklin Regional, Trent Reese from Plum, Jack White from Norwin. That's a really good weight class outside of those two hammers. In the Northern, I like that weight class too. Griffin Reed, Sam Jacobs, Gavin Rush. I think those are the 3 clearly top 3 guys there. And in the Southern, it's definitely the most outside of the East, right? This has the most parity because you have Darius McMillan, Cole Gibbons. Both guys have been state qualifiers in their career. Luke Dunlop's a state qualifier. So you have 3 guys that have been to Hershey before. Derek Worstel from USC as well. I like him. Ian Buccelli from Bethel Park has also been wrestling well. So I like those top 5, and I think those top 5 are pretty competitive.
It has happened before, Jeff, as far as wrestling somebody 4 times in the postseason. Can you think of another time it has happened in the WPIAL?
Well, I know. Well, Headley and Pletcher weren't in the same weight class, or excuse me, they weren't in the same section. But most recent was Dylan Evans and Sean Taylor.
They wrestled 4 times?
Yeah.
Yeah. The other one I was thinking of was, this is going way back, but Jason Nolf, Nick Zanetta, I believe they did it as well.
Yeah.
Wrestling sections all the way to the States. So it's just it's interesting, right? When they have them 4 times, it gets tough to wrestle as far as back to back to back back weeks. So I'd imagine this one could be the one week where you kind of see them open up a little bit, and it'll get tighter as the time goes on. Eastern side at 160, Lonzie Vioma of Connellsville, 15 wrestlers in that weight class, but Vilma is the top seed. North, Kellen Buggy of North Allegheny is your top seed, 14 wrestlers there. And in the South, Rook Smith of Montour, he is your top seed, 13 wrestlers entered there.
Yeah, 60 is another really good weight class. You start. I'll start in the East with Vielma, obviously being a returning state medalist is the guy, but I like Cooper Dietz, and honestly, Braden White is somebody who I would not be surprised to see him win it. I think he has all the ability and capability to win a section title. It's just a matter, can he get over that hump and beat Dietz and then Vielma. Ethan Cartwright's another guy who I've been impressed with. Christian Lowther, Logan Maestrich from Penn Trafford, and even Connor Hoffman from Bell Vernon, one of their top incoming freshmen. So I think 7 guys here are all legit. One of those guys is not going to make it out. So it's a pretty deep weight class when you look at the East, as we are kind of been saying for the last couple of minutes. You look at the Northern section, another good weight class, Kellen Buggy, 15-6, Travis Shear, Chu, and Sutton Stoner. But I think Buggy is the clear favorite there. And then the South, this one is interesting because Rook Smith is a guy who we saw how good he's been, but I wouldn't say inconsistent, but he's had some ups and downs. Brock Evans, limited in action this year, only 22 matches. He's a state qualifier, just committed to Fairmont State, so shout out Brock Evans for committing there. Liam Costa is somebody who I've really been impressed with this year. I'm excited to see how he finishes the postseason.
In the East at 172, Bodie Marlowe of Thomas Jefferson, your top seed, 13 wrestlers entered. In the North, Mario Hutcherson of Kiski area, he is your top seed, 13 wrestlers entered there. And in the South, Bryce Catanzaro of Upper St. Clair, he is your top seed, 14 wrestlers entered there.
Yeah, and so I want to go back to you said about 4 times, and I did misspeak because Sean Taylor and Dylan Evans, they didn't have a region, right? So it was sections, WPIAL states. So there wasn't, this is the first year in AAA where they're going to actually have 4 weekends where they're actually competing in the individual postseason. So it was 3 weekends, but it was every single individual postseason event that they were both in. So not 4, but so maybe Double A would only be the only possibility to see that they would wrestle 4 times. So I'm sure Stats Wonderly is going to be able to tell us here. 172, 172 stacked, but in the East, it's definitely even more stacked because you have Bodie Marlowe there, 37-2. Sepelak from Plum is somebody I've been very impressed with. Caden Wills from West Mifflin hasn't had as much success late in the season as he did in the beginning, but I think he could make some noise. Riley Schaefer as well from Norwin, but Marlowe is clearly the guy. Hutcherson is, as a freshman, man, I mean, he's been quietly just doing his job and beating everybody he's supposed to beat, but he's doing it with an exclamation point. I think he's really just beating guys up. This is going to be a really good weight for him. This starts off his run to Hershey, and the northern section here is stacked. Hutcherson, Morvay, Mac Miller, Caleb Kinsey, all top 4 guys here are very, very solid. You even throw in Dom Finale as well from Indiana. I think that's a really good weight class. So I'm looking forward to seeing if Hutcherson can get the job done and to what margin he can get that done with. Because you look at the South is pretty much wide open. Cantanelzaire from Upper St. Clair, he's good. Aiden Solomon from Candimac, he's a guy from California. His wrestling 3 years prior in California, so he's new to Pennsylvania. His sister's really, really good. We're going to talk about her. But yeah, it's 72's top heavyweight.
189 pounds in the East, Hunter Snyder of Latrobe. He is your top seed. 12 wrestlers entered there. In the north, Mark Gray of Kiski area, he is your top seed. 14 wrestlers entered there. And in the south, Jake Stevenson of Waynesburg is your top seed. 11 wrestlers entered there.
I mean, look how deep some of these weights are. You look at the northern section: Mark Gray, Nez Green, Mason Hardtongue, Tay Bradshaw, Jack Vitti. Those are all guys with solid credentials to their names. Mark Gray, I'm happy to see him entered. He was a little bit banged up, and he's had some injuries all over his career, but state medalist 2 years ago, so he's a guy I think is looking to make a statement. And you look at the South, Jake Stevenson is clearly the guy, but again, limited, 9-0 on the year. I think if he's healthy, he's clearly the guy. Bryce Collins is young, and he'll get there eventually, but Stevenson is a veteran. So yeah, I'm excited for this weight class. Obviously, Hunter Snyder at the East is favored there, but Zach LeBrier and Henry Patz have something to say about that.
In the East at 215, another premier matchup, Jeff. Jake Conroy of Ringgold is your top seed. Elijah Brown of Bell Vernon also entered there. 12 total wrestlers in that weight. A good one in the north, too, though. You got Cooper Roskoski of Kiski area. He's your top seed. Roman Thompson of Central Catholic also there. 13 total wrestlers in that weight. And in the south, Braden Collins of Cannon McMillan, your top seed, with 13 wrestlers there as well.
So another 1 versus 2, right? So if there is a place that you're going to go, it's definitely the East. Jake Conroy and Elijah Brown combined, they only have 1 loss on the year, and that's Elijah Brown, who's lost to Conroy. So they're 60-1 combined this year thus far, and they've wrestled each other, and Elijah Brown lost in overtime. So that's worth the price of admission. Chris Cook is in there as well, but outside of that, it's clearly those two. Roskoski, Thompson, that has a lot of potential to be a good match. Thompson, Pittsburgh Central Catholic doesn't wrestle a ton of stronger competition. The county tournament was probably one of their toughest tournaments. Roskoski has wrestled in a couple, bigger tournaments like Powerade, even the Fred Bell. So I think Roskoski and Thompson should be a good one. And, yeah, I mean, you look at and the South too. I like Braden Collins from Cannon Mac. He has a win over Roan Tustin, who's a state qualifier at heavyweight. So that's 215 is a fun one, and the East is where you want to be at.
285 in the East, Shep Turk of Thomas Jefferson, your top seed. 14 wrestlers entered there. In the North, Braden McConaughey of North Allegheny, he's your top seed. 13 wrestlers entered there. And in the South, Cam Dana of West Allegheny, your top seed. 11 wrestlers entered there.
So I think there's a lot more balance between these sections. Shep Turk is clearly a favorite in the East. Grisoulas from Plum is right there as well. Not saying he's on Turk's level, but I think he's in the right spot there with Scarton from Latrobe as well. So I like that weight class. I like McConaughey. I like Rierick. That's a good weight class in the North. And then in the South, this is probably the deeper weight class of all the heavyweights. This is definitely one where there's the most depth. Cam Dana, Ben Lloyd. Ben Lloyd's a state qualifier. Michael Gibson has a win over Lloyd. They split a couple matches. Zach Schrump from Peters Township was a regional place winner. Owen Rush is a very solid sophomore as well. So I think you have 5 really good guys here. Even Halbed from Montour's not bad as well. So yeah, that's the southern section is definitely the top in heavyweight.
So we got a lot of wrestling coming up this weekend with 6 total sections. But let's not forget, Jeff, we also have a WPIAL championship happening this weekend. The girls will be taken to the mats at North Allegheny, where we should see a lot of fun action here in the 13 weight classes that we'll have. And starting off at 100 pounds, Blythe Letters of Shaler. She comes in as your top seed.
I mean, you're a Letters and you're from Shaler. You're probably pretty good. She's a freshman. She's had some good wins. Walzer from Montour is a junior. She dropped down from 106. She had been wrestling with the boys at 107. So, and you're going to see that in some of these weights where girls have been wrestling with the boys and now they're wrestling with the girls. So, but Letters, I'm excited to see what she does, and I got to find out the relation to the Letters family.
Yeah, and that's something where you see some of these records, and it can be a little misconceiving, right? Because you don't really know, like, okay, were they wrestling with the boys, not? So it's just something to keep in mind as you look at the records, as they may not be 100% accurate as far as true, girl matchups. 106, Ella Trehan of Fort Cherry. She is your top seed.
Yeah, and you have Malia Ramos, who's there as well. She's solid, and Trahan from Fort Cherry has had a really good season. But there's a lot of depth here. You got Martinez and Campbell as well. Ella Campbell from Burroughs had a good season. Even Beener from Mount Lebanon has had a good year. Riley Maines from Southmoreland, I think, also a girl who had some quality wins. So I think there's a lot of depth here.
112 pounds for Canna McMillan. Marley Solomon is your top seed.
So Solomon is from California. She was a Fargo national finalist last year. She moved to Cannon Mac, had a really good season thus far. She's wrestled all the way up to 124. She's wrestling 112 for the postseason. Could see a rematch with her and Julia Horger in the finals, state finals. They wrestled in Fargo, so that would be pretty special. But Trinity Moore from Collinsville has also had a really good year, so she's at that weight class.
118 pounds. Paige Jocks of Mount Lebanon is the top seed.
So Jocks is definitely the top seed here, but I like the depth because you have Ireland from Knock, who's had a good season in her junior campaign. Zemish from Butler is also somebody who's had some success throughout the year. Paige Jocks is the clear favorite here, but I think there's some good competition.
124 pounds, Anna Duncan of South Park. She's going to go in as the number 1 seed.
Just like their boys, the girls program is done really well. So I don't know what's going on in South Park, but they're really doing a good job in their feeder programs and keeping them developed all the way through. Duncan has had a really good year thus far at 124. I like Cunningham from Beaver as well. Strader from Pine Richlands had a good season. Bella Stewart is also kind of peaking at the right time. Klassen from Plum, a girl who's been very competitive in her sophomore campaign. So I like this weight class because yes, there's maybe a clear favorite, but I think there's a lot of parity here.
130 pounds, Haley Smarsh of Moon takes the top seed.
Smarsh is a returning state finalist. Not saying she hasn't quite been competing at that level, but she's had some losses this year, and she's been wrestling in some of the tough tournaments like Ironman and Beast, and wasn't sure exactly what weight she was going to go, whether it was 30 or 36, but she settled into 30, where she's definitely the top seed as a returning state finalist. But you have Sophia Davis from Plum, who's also very solid. Maddie Fisher from Seneca Valley, very solid. Van Slyke from Mount Lebanon. Mount Lebanon's girls coming up through are going to be absolutely insane. You got Emma Petrovich from Collinsville, who's wrestling well. So I like this weight class because you have Smarsh and Davis kind of leading the pack, but you have some other good wrestlers. Should be very competitive.
136 pounds, Ava Golding of Kiski area is your top seed.
Yeah, and these two, so Golding and Nobles from Collinsville have wrestled a couple times already, and Golding's one of the best in the state. Undefeated on the year, returning state medalist. Nobles, a girl who's been right there in the mix. I think these two are the clear top girls, but Alfera from Laurel is another one that I think's been wrestling well. Bungard from North Allegheny has a decent season as well.
142, Abigail Dolange of Avella is your top seed.
What do you got to say, Greg? You got a Avella girl seeded number 1.
There we go.
What do you know about
the
Dolange?
Hey, obviously she wrestled at Fort Cherry the last couple of years, right? With the co-op they had, and obviously state qualifier last year, had a great season. So, coming back and 24-1 this season, expecting some big things here this weekend.
You'll be pulling for your Avella Eagles, right?
That's right.
Not the Philadelphia Eagles who we had to see win a Super Bowl. Dolange, yeah, she's had a really good year. I think Tresco's had a really good year too for Kiski, both sophomores. Naisman from USC has wrestled well, but I think Dolange, this is hers to prove, right? I mean, this is a good weight for her, and she comes in ranked number 7 in the state. So I think it's it's time for her to show that.
148, Josephine Dolman of Norwin is your top seed.
Yeah, and Dolman's she's a stud. So Dolman's currently ranked number 4 in the state. 2-time state medalist last year. She was 5th in PIAA first year there. This is a good weight class with her. Gray from Cannon Mac is pretty solid. Ashby from Trinity's had a good year. Maya Scott as well. So Dolman's the clear front runner here, but I like Gray and Ashby and Scott to battle.
155, Carson Champion of Norwin, your top seed.
Yeah, and you're going to see a lot of similar, like with the East, right? You have Norwin, you've got Plum, you've got Kiski. A lot of these teams, they kind of cluster and bunch. There's a lot of really good girls from all across that area. Silent Victory, I know, is one club that produces a lot of top-end talent. Josephine Dolman is somebody who, she's had a good year. Carson Champion. I don't know why I was saying Dolman. Carson Champion from Norwin's had a really good season thus far. Sophia Folks kind of to me is the question mark here, because Folks is somebody who 2 years ago was a state medalist for North Allegheny when it was still just unofficial. Was injured last year. Not sure how healthy she is right now. But she could make some noise. Champion was a state qualifier last year. Colisi from Laurel, another girl who's had a good season. And Cameron Body from Collinsville, I feel like she's been around for a while. She's ranked number 15 in the state, 2-time state qualifier. So, but yeah, you definitely see some bunching with girls in the same kind of region.
Yeah, deep weight at 155. 170 pounds, Octavia Walker of Norwin, your top seed.
170 is a really good weight class in the WPIAL. You've got, Calgaro, who is currently ranked number 2 in the state. She was 3rd in Hershey last year. Was late to coming back. She got a little bit banged up during soccer. She's back in the lineup, and I think she's settled into 170. Octavia Walker, on the other hand, has wrestled really well this year. So I'm excited to see where these two end up, because I think we could see that one wrestle a couple more times. Greg, let's not forget Virginia Smith from Avella, number 3.
That's right. Another Eagle.
Let's go.
Looking solid. I mean, this is why it had to represent the Avella Eagles here this week, Jeff. They got some really good girls coming out, and obviously the boys wrestling in the section side as well. But, definitely the girls are going to be the story, I think, this weekend. 190 pounds, Elena Clausen of Plum. She is your top seed.
Yeah, and this could be a number 2 versus number 3 in the state. You got Clausen and Rush. Both were state medalists last year. Rush was 2nd in the state last year. Clausen was 6th. Clausen does have a win over Rush this year, but that's a really good weight class. Then you throw in Bernard from Valley as well. Jenna Chapman from AG has had a good season, but you have 2 of the best girls in the state, so it's going to be hard for any of these other girls to push them.
235, Zoe Murphy of Southmoreland is your top seed.
So Zoe Murphy has had a really good season. She was a state qualifier last year, was 7th in the state in the unofficial. She's only a junior. She's currently ranked number 6 in the state. I think she's the clear favorite here. There's not many weight classes where you're like, yeah, there's definitely like maybe Solomon, but Murphy, I think, is the clear favorite here. I think the rest are just kind of wrestling for 2nd and 3rd.
Jeff, that was a lot of wrestling we just broke down there.
There's a ton. There's a ton of wrestling.
Yeah, we got 6 total sections coming up this weekend between AA and AAA, the girls WPIAL championships as well. So next week we're gonna have a lot to recap, and then obviously we're gonna have a lot to look forward to with a pair of WPIAL championships coming up next weekend. So we're in the thick of it now, and it's gonna be a fun 4 weekends of wrestling action.
For sure, I'm looking forward to it.
For Jeff Upson, I'm Greg Warnock. We appreciate you watching and listening.